New Orleans, Louisiana, August 1856. When city authorities finally raided the Delacroix mansion on Esplanade Avenue, they expected to find evidence of a single poisoning. The family's physician, Dr. Henri Rousseau, had reported his suspicions after treating 3 members of the Delacroix household for symptoms he couldn't attribute to any natural illness. What investigators discovered instead was evidence of a methodical poisoning campaign that had been ongoing for nearly 4 years, claiming the lives of at least 14 people and sickening dozens more within one of New Orleans's most prominent Creole families. The person responsible was a woman the family had owned since she was 8 years old. Violet. No surname in the records, simply Violet. Listed in the Delacroix plantation ledgers as kitchen slave. Purchased 1839. Value $600. She was 33 years old when authorities arrested her, and she'd been systematically poisoning the family that owned her since 1852, using her position as head cook to administer death, one carefully measured dose at a time. But what made the case extraordinary wasn't just the duration or the death toll. It was what authorities found in Violet's quarters above the kitchen house. A journal, written in flawless French, documenting every poisoning with the precision of a scientist conducting experiments. Recipes for various poisons derived from plants common to Louisiana. Detailed observations about dosage, symptoms, and mortality rates. And most disturbingly, a list of names. 73 names. 14 were crossed out, marking deaths Violet had accomplished. 59 remained, representing targets she hadn't yet reached before her arrest. Before we continue with the story of Violet and the poisoning campaign that terrorized one of New Orleans's wealthiest families, we need you to join this investigation. Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and hit that notification bell, because stories like this, where the powerless found terrible power through knowledge and patience, deserve to be told. Leave a comment telling us what you think. We want to know your perspective on resistance that takes the form of hidden violence, on justice sought through methods that blur every moral line. What happened in the Delacroix kitchen didn't begin with poison. It began with a child stolen from her mother, and a lesson about power that would shape everything Violet would become. Violet was born in 1823 on a sugar plantation outside New Orleans. Her mother, whose name doesn't appear in any surviving records, was a field worker. Violet's father was unknown, though plantation records suggest he was likely the plantation owner, or one of his sons, given that Violet was described as light-skinned and was selected for house service rather than field work. In 1831, when Violet was 8 years old, she was sold separately from her mother. The Delacroix family purchased her specifically to be trained as a kitchen servant. The sale price of $600 was high for a child, but the Delacroix family was looking for young enslaved people who could be molded into the perfect domestic staff for their grand Esplanade Avenue mansion. Violet was trained by the Delacroix family's existing cook,
an elderly enslaved woman named Celestine, who'd worked in the kitchen for over 40 years. Celestine taught Violet French cuisine, the elaborate, multi-course meals that New Orleans's Creole aristocracy demanded. She taught her about ingredients, about timing, about the art of making food that would impress guests and reflect well on the family's status. But Celestine also taught Violet something else: how to survive, how to remain invisible while being indispensable, how to read the moods of the family and adjust behavior accordingly,
How to endure degradation while maintaining some small core of self that couldn't be touched by those who owned your body, but not your thoughts. Violet proved to be an exceptional student. By age 15, she was assisting Celestine with all major meals. By age 18, when Celestine died, Violet had assumed the position of head cook, managing a kitchen staff of 3 other enslaved people and producing meals that made the Delacroix family's dinner parties legendary throughout New Orleans society. The Delacroix family consisted of Monsieur Claude Delacroix, age 52 in 1841, when Violet became head cook, a wealthy sugar planter who maintained both the Esplanade mansion and a plantation 30 miles upriver. His wife, Madame Isabelle Delacroix, age 48, managed the household staff with strict efficiency. They had 4 children: Antoine, age 26, who was being groomed to inherit the family business; Marguerite, age 23, unmarried and living at home; Philippe, age 19, attending university; and Celeste, age 16, the youngest. The family also included Claude's elderly mother, Madame Geneviève Delacroix, age 78, and Isabelle's widowed sister, Madame Louise Chevalier, age 52, who'd moved into the mansion after her husband's death. Violet served this family for 11 years without incident. She cooked their meals, managed the kitchen, trained new staff, and performed her duties with the efficiency and excellence the family expected. By all accounts, she was the perfect servant. Quiet, skilled, obedient, invisible except when her presence was required. What the family didn't know was that Violet had been educating herself. Celestine had taught her to read, secretly, using religious texts and cooking manuals. After Celestine's death, Violet had expanded her literacy, sneaking books from the family's library when she cleaned. She read everything she could access: history, philosophy, science, literature. She educated herself to a level that would have surprised anyone who bothered to notice, though no one did. Enslaved people weren't supposed to be literate. The Delacroix family never imagined their cook could read French better than some of their own children. Violet particularly studied 2 subjects: botany and chemistry. The family's library contained several texts on medicinal plants, on the properties of various herbs and compounds. Violet read them all. She learned which plants were healing and which were poisonous. She learned about dosage, about symptoms, about how the human body responded to various substances. She became an expert in toxicology without ever formally studying the subject. She also studied the family. She observed them constantly. She learned their habits, their preferences, their weaknesses. She knew Claude's fondness for rich sauces. She knew Isabelle's habit of afternoon tea. She knew Antoine's preference for strong coffee. She knew every detail of how the family ate, what they ate, when they ate. She possessed knowledge that could be powerful, if one knew how to use it. The transformation from obedient servant to methodical poisoner began in March 1852,
triggered by an event that Violet documented in her journal with cold clarity. Antoine Delacroix, the eldest son and heir, had gotten one of the kitchen servants pregnant. The girl's name was Marie, age 16, who'd worked under Violet's supervision for 2 years. When Isabelle Delacroix discovered the pregnancy, she had Marie sold away immediately, separating her from her mother and siblings, who also worked on the property. Marie was sent to a plantation deep in Louisiana's interior, known for brutal conditions, where enslaved people typically died within 5 years. Violet had known Marie since the girl was 14. She'd trained her, protected her when possible, tried to give her some small measure of safety in circumstances that offered none.
Marie Sale. Her fate, her complete erasure from the property as if she'd never existed, triggered something in Violet that had been building for years. The first entry in Violet's journal, dated March 15th, 1852, reads, "Marie is gone, sent away to die slowly, because Antoine couldn't control himself and Madame couldn't tolerate the evidence of her son's nature. They dispose of us when we become inconvenient. They expect us to serve them, to feed them, to sustain their lives while they destroy ours without thought or consequence. I have decided they will face consequences. I will be the instrument of those consequences. They will continue to eat what I prepare, but I will add ingredients they don't know about. I will serve them justice, disguised as dinner." Violet began with small doses. She cultivated plants in the kitchen garden that looked decorative, but had toxic properties. Oleander, foxglove, castor beans. She dried and processed these plants, creating powders and tinctures that could be added to food in quantities too small to detect by taste, but large enough to cause symptoms over time. Her first target was Antoine. She added ground oleander seeds to his morning coffee. Just a few grains, not enough to kill quickly, but enough to cause progressive cardiac damage. Antoine began experiencing irregular heartbeats, fatigue, nausea. The family doctor attributed it to stress and overwork. Antoine continued drinking his coffee, and Violet continued her careful dosing. In June 1852, Antoine died of heart failure at age 27. The family was devastated. Dr. Rousseau found the death suspicious given Antoine's youth and relative health, but autopsy techniques in 1852 weren't sophisticated enough to detect plant-based poisons, especially those administered gradually over months. Antoine was buried with all the ceremony his position merited.
Violet attended the funeral service as part of the household staff and felt, according to her journal, satisfaction that justice had been served to one who deserved it. But Violet didn't stop. The death of one family member who directly caused Marie's suffering wasn't enough. Violet had concluded that the entire family was complicit. They all benefited from the system that allowed Marie to be destroyed. They all ate food prepared by enslaved hands, without acknowledging the humanity of those hands. They all treated Violet and the other staff as property, as tools, as things that existed solely to serve the family's comfort. Violet expanded her campaign. She began poisoning multiple family members simultaneously, using different substances and dosages for different targets. Some she dosed heavily, intending to kill. Others she dosed lightly, intending to cause suffering, but not death. She was conducting experiments, testing her theories about various poisons, documenting results with scientific precision.
Her journal from this period reads like a toxicology textbook written by someone with intimate knowledge of both chemistry and human behavior. She documented which family members ate which foods most frequently. She noted their typical portion sizes, their preferences, their schedules. She recorded symptoms after each poisoning event, noting onset times, severity, duration. She calculated refined dosages based on observed results. By December 1852, 2 more family members had died. Philippe, age 20, died of what appeared to be severe gastroenteritis. Madame Louise, age 53, died of symptoms the doctor described as consistent with stroke. Both deaths were attributed to natural causes or acute illness. No one suspected poison because no one imagined the cook might be killing the family she served. Violet's methodology was sophisticated. She never used the same poison consecutively.
She varied her timing so deaths didn't cluster suspiciously. She ensured symptoms were consistent with natural diseases common to the era. And, critically, she never poisoned the entire family simultaneously. She always left some members untouched, allowing healthy family members to care for sick ones, preventing anyone from noticing that everyone who ate at the Delacroix table was at risk. Through 1853 and 1854, the poisonings continued. Madame Genevieve, the elderly grandmother, died in January 1853. The family's regular physician attributed her death to natural causes related to advanced age. Celeste, the youngest daughter, became chronically ill but didn't die. Violet had dosed her lightly, wanting Celeste to suffer but recognizing that too many deaths might trigger investigation. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, Violet's campaign reaches its horrifying peak. If this story is affecting you, share this video with someone who appreciates complex historical narratives. Hit that like button to support our content, and subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together how one woman's quest for vengeance finally came to light. Because what happened in 1855 would finally expose the poisoning that had been hidden for years. By 1855, Claude and Isabelle Delacroix had lost 4 family members to what they believed were unfortunate but natural causes. They were grieving but not yet suspicious. Death was common in 19th century life. Families regularly lost multiple members to disease, accidents, and medical conditions that modern medicine would easily treat. But in March 1855, something changed the family's perspective. A dinner guest, a business associate of Claude, named Monsieur Jean-Baptiste Fortier, became violently ill during a meal at the Delacroix mansion. He survived, but his symptoms were so severe that his personal physician became suspicious and reported the case to medical authorities. This prompted Dr. Rousseau, the Delacroix family physician, to review his records of the family's medical history over the past 3 years. The pattern he observed alarmed him. Multiple deaths and chronic illnesses within a single household. Symptoms that, viewed individually, seemed consistent with natural causes, but viewed collectively, suggested something more sinister. Rousseau shared his concerns with Claude Delacroix. Initially, Claude rejected the idea that someone might be poisoning his family. But as Rousseau detailed the statistical improbability of so many deaths and illnesses in one household, Claude began to suspect his physician might be correct. The question was, who might be responsible? Claude's first instinct was to suspect business rivals or political enemies.
He'd made enemies through his sugar business and his involvement in Louisiana politics. Perhaps someone was targeting his family for revenge or to gain business advantage. But Rousseau asked a more direct question. Who had access to all the family's food? Who could poison multiple family members over years without being suspected? The answer was obvious. The kitchen staff. Claude initially rejected this possibility. His enslaved servants had always been loyal. They'd served his family for years without incident. Why would they suddenly begin poisoning the family that fed, housed, and clothed them? Rousseau's response was blunt. Because you own them. Because they have no choice but to serve you. Because perhaps one of them has reached a breaking point that you, comfortable in your position, cannot imagine. Claude authorized a search of the kitchen house and the staff quarters. He ordered it done carefully, not wanting to alarm whoever might be responsible. The search occurred on August 12th, 1856, while Violet was at market purchasing ingredients for dinner. The journal was found beneath a floorboard in Violet's sleeping quarters. The hiding place was simple, but had been effective for over 4 years. No one searched enslaved people's quarters routinely. Privacy was non-existent in most aspects of their lives, but their sleeping spaces were generally ignored, except during specific searches for stolen property. The journal's contents were immediately damning. 143 pages written in precise French, documenting 4 years of systematic poisoning. Names, dates, substances used, dosages administered, symptoms observed, deaths confirmed. The entire campaign laid out with scientific precision and complete self-awareness. Claude read the journal with growing horror. This wasn't a crime of passion or sudden rage. This was methodical murder, conducted by someone he'd trusted implicitly. Someone who'd served his family for 15 years. Someone he'd considered loyal and obedient. The realization that his cook had been slowly killing his family while maintaining a facade of perfect service shattered his understanding of the people he owned. When Violet returned from market, she was arrested immediately. She didn't resist. According to witnesses, she seemed almost relieved that the campaign had finally been discovered. She was taken to the parish prison and held for trial. The trial of Violet began in October 1856. It attracted enormous attention throughout New Orleans. The idea that an enslaved woman could conduct such a sophisticated poisoning campaign challenged assumptions about enslaved people's capabilities. Many white New Orleanians had convinced themselves that enslaved people were intellectually inferior, incapable of complex planning or abstract thought. Violet's actions forced confrontation with the reality that enslaved people were capable of extraordinary intelligence, planning, and sustained deception when circumstances demanded it. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. The journal, physical evidence of poisonous plants in the kitchen garden, testimony from Dr. Rousseau about the family's suspicious pattern of deaths, testimony from surviving family members about their illnesses. The case was clear. Violet had poisoned at least 14 people, killing them methodically over 4 years. The defense was minimal.
Louisiana law in 1856 provided almost no legal protection for enslaved people accused of crimes against white people. Violet's court-appointed attorney argued only that her actions resulted from mental instability brought on by her enslavement, that years of servitude had driven her temporarily insane, making her not fully responsible for her actions. Violet rejected this defense. When given opportunity to address the court, she spoke clearly and without apparent remorse. Her statement, recorded in trial transcripts, reads, "I am not insane. I knew exactly what I was doing. I did it deliberately, with full awareness of consequences. The Delacroix family destroyed Marie. They destroyed countless others. They lived in luxury built on our suffering, and treated us as less than human. I decided they would face consequences for their actions. I used the only power available to me. They trusted me to prepare their food. I used that trust to administer justice. They would never face otherwise. I regret nothing, except that I was discovered before completing my work." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Louisiana law prescribed execution for enslaved people who murdered white people. The judge sentenced Violet to death by hanging, to be carried out within 30 days. Violet was executed on November 20th, 1856, at the parish prison in New Orleans. Execution of enslaved people was typically public spectacle,
designed to terrorize other enslaved people and reinforce white control. But authorities decided Violet's execution would be private, witnessed only by required officials. They feared that public execution might turn Violet into a martyr, might inspire other acts of resistance. Violet's final words, according to the prison chaplain who attended her, were, "I am not afraid. I accomplished what I intended. I showed that even those you call property have power. Remember me." The aftermath of Violet's case rippled through New Orleans society. White families became paranoid about their kitchen staff. Many enslaved cooks were dismissed and replaced, though this simply spread fear rather than eliminating it. Some families began requiring their cooks to taste all food before serving it, attempting to prevent poisoning through forced exposure. But the deeper impact was psychological. Violet's case forced white slaveholders to confront an uncomfortable reality. The people they owned, the people they trusted with intimate aspects of daily life, possessed not just physical power to resist, but intellectual power as well. Enslaved people could plan, could deceive, could maintain facades for years while conducting sophisticated campaigns of resistance. The case also inspired fear among enslaved populations, though in complex ways. Some saw Violet as a hero who struck back against oppression. Others feared her actions would trigger reprisals against all enslaved people, making their already dangerous lives even more precarious. Both responses were valid. Violet's resistance was both inspiring and terrifying, demonstrating power while also demonstrating the likely consequences of using that power. The Delacroix family never recovered from Violet's campaign. Plaud died in 1859 of natural causes, though some speculated his health had been permanently damaged by the poisons he'd survived. Isabel lived until 1867, but remained in poor health.
Celeste, the youngest daughter who'd been chronically poisoned but not killed, suffered lifelong health problems. Marguerite, the only family member Violet had never poisoned, eventually sold the Esplanade mansion and moved to France, unable to remain in a house where so many family members had been murdered. The mansion itself gained a reputation as cursed. It changed hands multiple times over the following decades, with residents reporting feelings of unease and experiencing unexplained illnesses. Whether these reports were genuine phenomena or psychological reactions to the house's history is unclear. The house was eventually demolished in the 1920s, replaced by modern construction. Violet's journal was preserved in Louisiana court archives, though access was restricted for decades. The journal wasn't made available to researchers until the 1970s, when historians studying enslaved resistance began examining court records from poisoning cases. The journal's publication, in excerpted form in 1982, revealed the sophistication of Violet's planning and the cold clarity of her intentions. Modern historians who've studied Violet's case remain divided on how to interpret her actions. She was clearly a murderer who killed 14 people and sickened dozens more. Her victims included people who hadn't directly harmed her, like the youngest children and elderly grandmother. Her methods were cruel, causing prolonged suffering before death. Yet she was also an enslaved woman, with no legal recourse, no ability to seek justice through normal channels, no power except what she could covertly obtain. She lived in a system designed to dehumanize her, to extract her labor while denying her autonomy, to treat her as property rather than person. Her violence was response to systemic violence that was legal, accepted, and perpetual. Some historians argue Violet should be understood as a freedom fighter who resisted slavery through the only means available. Others argue that murdering children and elderly people crosses moral lines, regardless of circumstances. Still others suggest these categories are inadequate, that Violet exists in moral grey space, where traditional judgments about heroism or villainy don't apply cleanly. What's undeniable is that Violet was extraordinary. She educated herself to a level that would have impressed many formally trained people. She conducted scientific experiments with methodical precision. She maintained perfect deception for 4 years, while systematically killing the family she served. She demonstrated intellectual capacities that slavery's ideology claimed enslaved people didn't possess. Her story also reveals how slavery created conditions where extreme violence became rational response to daily existence. When legal and social structures offer no protection, when authority figures are also your oppressors, when every day of life is constructed to deny your humanity, the boundaries of acceptable resistance become profoundly unclear. Violet used her kitchen as a laboratory and her knowledge as a weapon. She transformed food from sustenance into instrument of death. She proved that even people with no formal power could find ways to exercise agency, though that agency took the form of hidden violence that ultimately consumed her life, as well as those she targeted. The case remains one of the most sophisticated poisoning campaigns in American history.
It's also one of the most disturbing examples of how slavery's dehumanization created circumstances where elaborate murder became one woman's chosen form of resistance and justice. What do you think about Violet's story? Was she a murderer who deserves only condemnation? A freedom fighter who resisted oppression through available means?
Or does her story exist in space, too complex for simple moral judgment, revealing how slavery created situations where traditional ethics collapsed? Leave your comment below. If you found this investigation compelling, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Share this with someone who appreciates complex historical narratives that resist easy interpretation. The stories that challenge us most are often the ones most important to examine. At Liturgy of Fear, we believe in presenting history honestly, acknowledging complexity, and preserving narratives that reveal uncomfortable truths about power, resistance, and the human capacity for both extraordinary intelligence and extraordinary violence. See you in the next video.